Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Good morning. Woo, nice work. Okay, I have to be honest, I did not expect on Friday morning, the morning after the night before, that this room was going to be as packed with people standing at the back. So this is awesome. I hope you guys have had an awesome conference so far. You are in for a real treat. You're in for a real treat this morning. We are maximizing the use of technology. So while there are only 2 speakers on stage, there are really 4 speakers who are actually going to participate this morning. So I'll just get right into it because I am hardly Chloe Dubois, and I am hardly young and vivacious and a trailblazer, but I'm going to pay homage to her because she was going to speak first this morning and suddenly had to cancel out. So I want to pay a little bit of homage to her, and as the co-founder of the Ocean Legacy Foundation, which is a Canadian BC-based nonprofit organization that was founded in 2013 with the goal to end ocean plastic waste. And so in the spirit of her and what she probably would have wanted to share with you and impart to you this morning, I'm going to do a little bit wearing an old hat that I have previously worn as a World Wildlife Funder. So without further ado, I wanted to talk to you as a lead-in to our other speakers this morning about the plight of our oceans, just very broadly from a sort of 100,000-foot perspective, just so that we're all on the same page, and then to give you a tiny little case study in terms of the role that I have personally played in terms of dealing with and eradicating and cleaning up ocean plastic. So the world's oceans, as many of you may or may not know, produce more than half of the oxygen that sustains life on the planet, which is pretty spectacular. I mean, we all know the grandiose size of the oceans, but they are a main sustenance factor for us as humans and species living on the planet. And the ability of our oceans to absorb CO2 is critical, so that if our oceans are under attack, this is a very basic fact of life and our future that is therefore jeopardized. Okay. So our oceans are the main source of protein for 1 billion people around the world. And without them, not only are we on planet Earth in great jeopardy in terms of our future, but many of our abilities to sustain ourselves and furthermore our livelihoods are in jeopardy. So at World Wildlife Fund, we as Canada have the largest coastline. We border the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Arctic Oceans. And if I'm not mistaken, we are the only nation in the world that actually has 3 coastal oceans bordering our nation. And that's very significant. So what was started in 1994, before my time as part of World Wildlife Fund, was really an effort by 20 volunteers in conjunction with employees at the Vancouver Aquarium. And this grew in 3 years, in 1997, to 20 sites, still within Vancouver. And by 2002, it had become a national conservation effort. A year later, there were more than 20,000 volunteers who were taking part now across the country. And then in 2010, the Vancouver Aquarium looked to join forces with World Wildlife Fund, so WWF Canada. And so by 2011, in my role with the organization, we actually were able to, under my leadership, to roll out the first co-branded effort of this Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup, so that we delivered a co-branded campaign nationally, pulled into it Loblaws as a key sponsor, as well as the Vancouver Aquarium, and what later became, or Vancouver Aquarium later rebranded and called themselves more recently Ocean Wise. So very significant, and I actually want to sort of just quickly harken back to yesterday in the EPR presentation when I think it was John from Unilever was talking about, from a corporate perspective, the kinds of things that corporates can do. And I think, part of the reason why I wanted to share this example with you today was it is a really good example of the corporate world and the not-for-profit world and the enviro world, specifically recycling, really integrating and bringing together their efforts. And from a scalability perspective, there is absolutely no way that the Great Canadian Shoreline Cleanup could have grown to the place that it has now grown to, and I'm going to share with you those in my next slide, just where the scalability has gotten to. But the reality is there are corporates out there who have money. And in our case, it was Loblaws. And I will share with you that when I joined WWF, Loblaws, as a Canadian national brand with really deep pockets, did not have their own sustainability department in-house. And so they were looking to advance their efforts in this space, but without having to do so from internal. And so they were looking for a partner that they could essentially wrap their name, their brand around, give money to offset the responsibility of what it was that they were trying to do, and to have that narrative with Canadians across the country that they were in this space doing the right kinds of activities that we as Canadians wanted to see them do, namely clean up the ocean coastlines. So if there's one thing from perhaps this presentation, and by no means do I mean any disrespect to my speakers who are going to come after me, but if there's one thing that you can say tangibly take back to your everyday opportunities, to your everyday challenges, is to kind of shift the pendulum and think outside the box in terms of the initiatives that you're trying to undertake. I've worn a corporate hat for the first 15 to 18 years of my career, and so shifting from the for-profit to the not-for-profit world, where I've spent the last 12 years, has been very significant. But if there's one thing that I know, those corporate guys, they have deep pockets, they've got lots of money, and as big as Loblaws is, they did not have the wherewithal to set up their own CSR, their own sustainability department. For what it's worth, I spoke to you about the fact that we joined forces in 2011. This is now 8 years later, and that relationship at WWF, albeit that I'm not there, is still like this. They are now a partner that is worth in excess of 7 digits large in terms of their contribution to the environment, and it's being offset by the fact that they have co-branded with WWF, and WWF are really the experts in the room when it comes to sustainability and the environment and recycling. And so take that back with you and think outside the box, that there are funders out there who can possibly be who you join forces with to help bring to life some of the efforts that you're looking to do. Okay, so I said I was going to share results. And, they're pretty spectacular. I think they speak for themselves. This is obviously an initiative that started back in 1994, but to be perfectly candid, it didn't really kind of scale itself until 2011. So these stats, although they go back to 1994, they really kind of are they speak to the last kind of 8 years of the partnership. And so with that, I want to actually conclude my remarks and lead into the fact that I'm not actually going to take questions because I feel like we should just kind of keep moving. I know that we will have time at the end to do so, and I was hardly supposed to be a speaker today, and just kind of lead into our next speaker. And so our next speaker is not actually even seated on the stage, so we are seriously employing technology today. So Joel Baziuk is going to be zooming in, which is kind of paramount to Skype, and he is he's the acting deputy director for the Global Ghost Gear Initiative, so GGGI, it's a bit of a mouthful, a collective impact alliance started by World Animal Protection in 2015 and currently managed by Ocean Conservancy. The GGGI brings together NGOs, fishing industry, private sector, academia, and governments to build evidence, define best practices, and inform policy. Joel has made appearances and spoken at numerous international conferences, and the list that follows is seemingly long and is quite diverse. So everything from Norway to Bali to Miami to Seattle, and I just wonder if Joel's sitting somewhere doing presentations all the time like he's going to do today and not ever actually in the room. He's prior to taking on the role of GGGI Deputy Director, Joel worked for 20 years in the Canadian fishing industry, 13 of which were as Operations Supervisor for Steveston Harbour Authority, Canada's largest commercial fishing harbour. Joel is also a recipient of the Canadian Department of Fisheries and Oceans Prix of Excellence 2016 and a 2017 Canada's Clean 50 honoree in relation to net recycling work. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the microphone, the stage, and the screens over to Joel.
Thank you very much. That's quite an introduction. I don't think I've ever heard it read like that before, so thank you very much for that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay? Is that a yes? People can hear me? Terrific. Thank you so much, everyone. So yeah, I'll just give a quick background about what the Global Ghost Gear Initiative is all about, and specific to this particular forum, about some of the work we're doing in the circular economy space with this. But first, a quick overview of what the Triple GI is all about. Ghost fishing gear, or abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear, is a major problem in the world's ocean. It is something that I think is not particularly well known or understood or reported on, and particularly in the public space. In 2009, UNEP and FAO estimated that about 640,000 tons of gear is lost in the ocean every year. But that was a best guess based on limited information at the time. The figure is likely much higher today. Recent studies suggest that it could consist of as much as 46 to 70% of all the macroplastic, floating macroplastic in our ocean when measured by weight. And we can't say that's ubiquitous across the entire globe, but what we can say is that a lot of the reports that we're getting in the last few years especially have seen numbers as high, sort of higher than 40% of what they're finding is lost gear when measured by weight. So it's definitely a major problem. It is also purposely designed to capture marine life. That's what it's for. It does so exceedingly well, which makes it the most harmful form of marine debris pound for pound. And it obviously impacts marine megafauna and whales and sea turtles and dolphins and things like that. But it also impacts on 5 to 30% of global harvestable fish stocks, depending on the fishery and the geography every year. So it is a major has a major effect on global food security and human health and livelihoods, coastal economies, all these different things. It is a sort of the next big thing on the marine debris space. So there is a global framework. There are several different ways that the global community is trying to address this. I've listed a few here. I won't go through them in the interest of time. This presentation will be made available after. But there are some high-level multilateral agreements that are being implemented that have ALDFG, or abandoned, lost, discarded fishing gear, addressed within. So what is the triple GI? The triple GI is meant to be a global solution to this global problem. As was mentioned in the introduction, we're a collective of NGOs, private sector, fishing industry, academia, and governments, all trying to tackle this problem on a global scale. So we want to do this as holistically and as in as circular a way as possible. So the three key aims are to reduce the amount of gear that gets lost, remove the gear that's already there, and recycle any gear that's recovered at the end of its life. So this is, I think, the main key point that we'll get into near the end that is most relevant for this particular forum. So we want to improve the health of marine ecosystems, protect marine life from harm, and safeguard human health and livelihoods. And each one of those things is equally important as the others. This just gives a quick global distribution of where our members are located. So we have about 100 member organizations. That slide is already out of date, even though I updated it 2 days ago. This gives you the geographical distribution. So about 100 member organizations across 6 continents. And we also have 14 supporting governments, as well as 6 global high-level affiliate supporting organizations, including the UN FAO, who we work very closely with. Oh, and you'll also notice, I'll just quickly point out that Canada was on the list of supporting governments. They also, just as a quick aside, have implemented a Ghost Gear plan, which includes $8.3 million in funding over the next 4 years to fund recovery, removal, research, recycling, this kind of thing. So there has been an announcement about that. There will be more to follow on it, but Canada is definitely on the cutting edge when it comes to government engagement on this issue. And here's just a quick snapshot of where some of our projects are around the world, the geospatial distribution around the world, and the green dots are some of the conferences on ALDFG we've been having in concert with FAO around the world. This is just a quick snapshot of the types of organizations that are included. So you'll see some large, high-level global corporates, fishing companies like Thai Union, one of the largest fishing companies in the world, as well as organizations like Marks and Spencer, Tesco, Nestle, down to some very small organizations that are doing really great work, boots on the ground, SOFR Initiative being one of them. Clean Foundation here in Canada, I could go on, but there's a quick snapshot of the types of organizations that we have that are members of this initiative. So we work across 3 main working groups: build evidence, define best practice, and inform policy, and catalyze and replicate solutions. So we're really trying to work across those 3 work streams to try to address this problem, as I said, as holistically as possible. One of the outputs of our build evidence working group is our Global Ghost Gear Initiative Global Data Portal, which is an online tool that people can access to see what the distribution of ghost gear records or reports around the world look like. That's a quick snapshot of what the global distribution looks like based on the information that we have collected. Noting areas like Africa, for example, are not particularly well represented, but that doesn't mean there's no gear there. It means there hasn't been very much study done there. So lots of work yet to be done, but this is one way to bring all of this information and these different data sets together into one place. And then we also have our Ghost Gear Reporter app, some screens of which can be seen on the right, to encourage citizen scientists and research organizations to use to implement data that they find, or fishers, if they lose the gear, they can report it anonymously, make sure it gets captured in that global data portal. We're using that evidence to inform best practice and define best practice and inform policy. These are some snapshots of some of the documents we've created. The development of a best practice framework for the management of fishing gear, which addresses every aspect of the fishing supply chain, from the fish harvesters themselves to fishing companies, retailers, corporates, gear manufacturers, recycling companies, academia, governments. There's a section in there for everyone on practical best practices that they can implement today to reduce their impact as makes sense in their particular stakeholder category. And of course, can provide links if they're interested. Here's a quick example of what the best practice framework looks like. It classifies the most harmful types of fishing methodology and technology in terms of likelihood of loss and also impact once lost. Gill nets are top, traps and pots are second, and fish aggregating devices or fads are third. Just gives an idea of what's in the best practice framework and how it looks. And here's an idea of some of the best practice recommendations for certain organizations at a very high level. Of course, the document itself goes into a lot more detail. And then when it comes to our solutions work, scaling this up around the world, here's just a couple of snapshots of some of our projects we have around the world. Bottom left is some folks from the SOFR initiative that I mentioned earlier in Nigeria. Top left is some ongoing recovery work in the Gulf of Maine, so mostly lobster traps. Center is work that's going on here in Canada and Cape Breton from the Cape Breton Environmental Association. Top right is a project we have ongoing in Myanmar and the Niak Archipelago. Bottom right is a snapshot of what we have going on in Indonesia, and the background is a dive workshop and recovery training in Panama. So lots of global distribution in terms of project work. And we also want to engage the industry positively. We want to raise awareness about the issue, educate the industry on its effects, and also learn from the industry on how and why it gets lost. It's important that fishers are not identified as villains in this story, because no fisher ever wants to lose gear. It's a common misconception when the public hears about this issue. They think the fishers are tossing gear over the side of their boats. That's not really the case. It gets lost due to snags beneath the surface, to storms, severe weather, those types of things. Intentional discard is relatively rare. But we are engaging with the fishing industry very actively in every one of our projects around the world to make sure that whatever solutions we're doing are viable, they're lasting, and that they make sense for the industry. And so here's sort of where we get into this particular audience, where they might be interested, is the recycling and circular economy component of what we try to do with our projects around the world. So most fishing gear is made of highly recyclable material, usually plastic. Either nylon 6, polyethylene, or polypropylene are the three most common. But the biggest challenges are consistency of supply, ensuring that the material is actually clean enough to be recycled, because obviously if it's been lost, especially, and it's recovered, it can be covered in all kinds of marine debris, life, algae, those types of things, and also transportation logistics to get the material from where it is to recycling facilities that can actually handle it, which have been few and far between across the globe, and that sort of remains the case today. It's a difficult material to deal with just by its very nature of being net. It's designed to get entangled in things, so kind of have to have a specialized facility to process it properly. A couple of case studies that we have going on around the world. So this was an example of Borreo out of, California, but they do their collection and recycling in Chile. Their Net Positiva program engages with local fishers to provide an end-of-life solution for fishing nets where otherwise they just end up being landfilled. That's the same up here in Canada in most regions, although we'll get to some Canadian solutions in a minute. Local fishers prepare the nets for recycling, so they clean all the debris off, get it ready for transport, and they develop their Net Plus material, which is basically the pellets that you can see there, made of nylon 6 that they use to create things like sunglasses, skateboards, frisbees, Jenga Ocean. Office chairs, I think, are a new thing that they're looking, office chairs components. So definitely taking the circular economy aspect to the next level and finding a use for this end-of-life material. And they're now expanding into communities in Brazil and Peru in 2019, 2020. So it's a very successful model, and it shows what can be done with this material at the end of its life, as opposed to just landfilling it. Steveston Harbour is a case study here in Canada. As was mentioned in the introduction, I actually, when I was working for Steveston Harbour Net Recycling Program, back in 2013, which saw about 160,000 pounds over the course of a few years recycled. But it actually had to be shipped to Aquafil, a company in Ljubljana, Slovenia, because there was no local solution other than incineration or burning here in Canada. That's changed a little bit, and I'll get into that in just a moment. But most of the nylon nets were shipped to Aquafil in Ljubljana, and the polyethylene nets were sent to Plastics Global in Lemvig, Denmark. It would be really great if we had a local solution. It looks like there are two local solutions available here in British Columbia, SOP Recycle being one of them that Steveston, I think, is using right now, as well as the Ocean Legacy Foundation, which was already mentioned earlier today. They've set up, or they're looking to set up, a facility that can process this material right here in Canada, in Delta, BC, which would be amazing. Too bad that Chloe wasn't able to give her presentation today, but wanted to give a shout out to her, as Ocean Legacy Foundation is a triple GI member, as is Steveston Harbour Authority. So again, engaging fishers to clean, strip, and bag the end-of-life fishing net and separate it into its components, both nylon 6 and polyethylene. So there is potential to expand this program up the coast of British Columbia and potentially Canada-wide, and there's certainly interest from the Canadian government in doing so. And now that we might have a local recycling option, that obviously becomes much more viable. And a quick case study on the Ocean Legacy Foundation. So again, they're in Delta, BC, working with processors, fabricators, engineers to put together a line specifically focused on recycling marine debris, which includes end-of-life fishing gear. So taking that specialization into consideration when they're designing a facility. And they're also working with businesses in the marine sector to identify sources of leakage along the coast. So it's not just about recycling, but it's about addressing the problem holistically in a Canadian context as well. and also providing a high-tech recycling plant in BC to be able to process fishing gear from here and other areas around the world. It'd be a huge step forward in Canada. Really looking forward to seeing how that works out, and wish Chloe was here to speak to it, but I'm sure that she'll be available for comment. And again, for the audience here today, some gear can be recycled. These types of gear, trawl nets, gill nets, these types of things can be recycled, and we're finding solutions for them. But opportunities remain. Crab traps, lobster pots, sometimes made of metal or other mixed components. We need to find a solution for those. Often they're just crushed or energy or waste energy facilities. We have polypropylene rope, which obviously doesn't have as much commercial value, but it would be great to find a solution for that. Multi-filament line, rope and line, which is very, very difficult to recycle, as I'm sure most people in the room are aware. Steel rings, cable, cork line, lead line, these are all things that need to be taken off for the plastic material to be recycled. There are opportunities for a lot of that stuff to be recycled at the end of its life as well. So just to get some people thinking about that. So innovation is needed. Some of our GGGI members, Fourth Element, for example, out of the UK, is making swimwear and things like that out of recycled fishing nets. They're using Aquafil, the same company we were looking at, in their Econyl fiber, which is recycled nylon. Plastics Global out of Denmark, who I mentioned before, doing a lot of polyethylene recycling. Planet Love Life making awareness bracelets out of it. Axiom Cycling Gear here in Canada making cycling bags and things like that out of recycled fishing gear. Ocean Legacy Foundation I mentioned. GWR Polymers and Net Gain Recycling, also recycling material in the UK. Local Independent Sea Anglers, or LISA, is looking to recover fishing angling line and create a recycling scheme out of that. It's been very successful in Europe. They're hoping to expand it. Blue Cycle out of Greece, looking to also find ways to recycle it. So there are people that are innovating, but it would really be nice to see more innovation in Canada, and really looking to Ocean Legacy to sort of be the tip of that spear. But just to get some ideas of what can be done with some of this material. And there's my contact info for anyone that's interested, our website, our Twitter handle, and I think I will leave it there and see if we have any questions, or I'm not sure if we're just moving on to the next presenter. But thank you very much for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
So thank you, Joel. I'm not actually going to jump back up onto the stage, but I'm going to take any questions that we might have. If we don't have any, I'm going to actually jump in, and I've got one for you, Joel. So thank you for that presentation. Really innovative work that's being done across the board. I think the one thing that jumps out at me that maybe you can comment on is this notion that your organization is transcending across borders. So you're a global organization. And so how do you reconcile the fact that different countries have different priorities, they're at different places in their own journey of recycling and prioritizing this? How do you reconcile that and then strive for a level of consistency to really kind of draw organizations and countries in so that this can be a top priority for them?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the best answer would be baby steps. We do need to take into consideration those things, and it's particularly like in small island developing states. You'll notice that some of the countries that support the GGGI are small island developing states with fewer resources and to deal with this issue, but they're also seeing on their coast, so it's a much more direct impact. Places like Vanuatu, for example. But we are working directly on the ground with those governments, and it's really important to identify the local need in the context of that local need and tailor any solutions projects to it. So, for example, the projects that you'll see us implementing in areas like Indonesia or Vanuatu will be very different than projects that you'll see implemented here in Canada or in Alaska, for example. Just because the local context and the need is different. So we do pride ourselves on building projects that take those local needs and abilities into consideration. As you mentioned, the GGGI does have a very wide network across the world. So we also try to involve our global experts and bring them into the projects so we can leverage their expertise, and also hold workshops with local stakeholders to spread that knowledge and build that capacity within the local context. Each one of our projects is actually meant to be sort of it's meant to implement systemic change. So it's not supposed to be just a cleanup, clean up some nets and leave. We're there to really start to institutionalize change within those communities and to teach them, educate them, and give them the tools to do that on their own beyond these sort of pilot projects and that usually go through multiple phases.
Awesome, thank you. Anyone else? All right, so thank you, Joel. I think we're going to move forward, move on. But what I will say is that hopefully at the end, we'll actually have some time for more questions. So if anything does kind of percolate in your brain and you want to tap back into Joel, that will be an opportunity for you. So we'll move on to our next speaker. Maja Vodanovic is an executive member of the Montreal Metropolitan Community and actually the mayor of Lachine, a borough of Montreal. She's an active member of the CMM's Environmental Commission and was elected to Montreal City Council in 2017. As a member of the National Zero Waste Council, Maja co-chaired the Plastic Advisory Panel, which produced a work document entitled Regulatory Approaches for Priority Plastic Wastes, the objective of which is to set out concrete solutions and suggest specific regulatory measures to prevent and better manage plastic waste. Passionate about environmental issues, Maja has been actively involved in cleaning up our waterways and protecting our green spaces. And this is, weirdly enough, actually almost to the day, the second time that I am introducing Maja before she speaks. So Maja, thank you and welcome to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I don't think there's many Quebecers here today. I think there's me, and I think maybe there's some company, a Quebec company that's here. Can I just see somebody raise their hand if anybody else is from Quebec here? No? Well, I'm alone. My sister who lives in Edmonton, so I was happy to meet her and drove me to Jasper. Thank you. So, as member of the Greater Montreal community, which is kind of we call it kind of Metro Montreal, I was involved in revising the whole process of our waste management in Quebec. We had huge consultations all summer long, and we came up with very interesting recommendations and solutions that, combined with my work at the National Zero Waste Council and as co-chair of the Plastic Committee, brings me here today to share with you some of the findings that came. Whoops. I'm a bit nervous. I'm not used to speaking in front of so many people that I don't know in a different province. So I'll stick to my notes, okay? So the National Zero Waste Council was founded in Montreal, was founded in Metro Vancouver in collaboration with the federal Canadian municipalities. And it is a leadership initiative that brings together governments, businesses, and non-governmental organizations to advance waste prevention in Canada and the transition to a circular economy. So we all know, after we've been to this conference now for 2 days, and it is very clear that just local and provincial governments, which are primarily responsible for managing solid waste in Canada, have little leverage to implement the needed legislation that we need. And we need the federal government to be involved, because it's only with very important legislation on the federal level that we can really come to a circular economy and bring the waste of plastics down. So I want to talk to you a bit about where I come from. I grew up in Yugoslavia, in Split, which is now called Croatia. And there, when I was a child, I had a very interesting experience with plastic, with the plastic industry. Because in the city, in our town, there was this huge, huge industry. And next to that industry was a very old house where I always used to go and play with my friends. And so on some days, in front of this plastic industry was a lot of pellets, the plastic pellets. They were all around, and we as friends, we would go there and we would slide on them, and it was a lot of fun. And when we would go into the old house, we would play in the house, and all of a sudden we would hear this boom noise. And that would mean that something went off in the plastic industry, some machinery started, and the TV would turn to snow, like shh, and everybody would be still. So this, as I was growing up and I was going there, so this, I didn't know much about plastics then, but this playful and ominous thing. And in our city of Split, there was also a very famous basketball team, and they were called Jugoplastica, the name of the company. And the year they won a European championship, they were nicknamed the Golden Plastics because they wore golden yellow shirts. So that industry has now died, and there is no more plastic industry in my hometown of Split. But in Canada, plastic is a large and growing industry, especially here in Alberta. So in 2017, 87 Canadian companies employing 4,000 people produced over 4 million tons of plastic resin, worth $10 billion. And the manufacturing of plastic goods is an annual $25 billion industry supporting 89,000 jobs. It is the fastest growing manufacturing activity in Canada, growing 5.5% every year since 2012. It produces 116 kilos of plastic per person per year. And I always I look at sometimes, on TV, and we're talking nationally about banning straws, and I always laugh, like, no, we have to do so much more. The growth of this industry relies on oil and an abundance of low-cost shale gas as feedstock. This growth has been supported by government intervention, such as the $2.1 billion Alberta announced last year or the year before to the petrochemical industry, which contributes to keeping virgin plastics very, very low. So I don't know, you must have seen this chart before. It has to do with circular economy. And while there have been efforts to reduce and reuse plastics, still 47% of our waste comes from packaging. Only 25% of our total plastic waste is collected for recycling. And only 9% of the great total is actually recycled, which means that 86% of plastics are still sent to landfills, or worse, end up in the environment and our waters. This is about 2,800,000 tons of plastics every year. 2 million, sorry. This plastic waste has an estimate worth of almost $8 billion. Now, if this plastic could be reused and put back into the value chain instead of polluting our environment, we would finally be moving in the right direction. And this chart actually, I don't know if I can point. Whoops, sorry, back. There's no way for me to point, eh? But anyways, you see the loop that goes back like this? That shows about 50% recycling. So this is kind of where we would like to be as Canadians. We would like to have, instead of 9% recycling, have 27% mechanical recycling and another 21% mechanical recycling from other waste and another 15% of chemical recycling. So this is where we would like to go, but we're not here yet. So last year, Canada, as well as 20 other countries, signed the G7 Ocean Plastic Charter. In this, we committed to making plastics that are, and listen to this, that are 100% reusable or recyclable by 2030. We also committed to increasing recycled content in plastic objects by at least 50%. That's huge, and that no later than 2030. Knowing today that we throw out 86% of all plastics, and that basically all our plastic products are made with virgin plastic resin and contain 0% recycled content. So if we intend to respect our commitment in a short 10-year span, we need to join forces, lobby together for strong and brave government action. And what I saw at this conference is really that we want to do this. Last year, Environment and Climate Change Canada commissioned Deloitte to do a very exhaustive study on the present situation. And in this report was released in June. And in it, it states very clearly that zero plastic waste cannot be achieved without concurrent strategic intervention by government, industry stakeholders, and the public across each stage of the plastic life cycle and targeted sectors. So as municipalities, we can individually impose bans on disposable products. Like Montreal did last year, we did a ban on the single-use thin plastic bag. It's working. Montreal, like Vancouver, also plans to ban in the near future some other notorious single-use plasticware we all know that we see littering the world. But we all know here and now that just those bans won't do much, and that we need serious engagements, once again, from higher government bodies to get to the real and lasting solution for plastics. So our National Zero Waste Council Plastic Advisory Committee panel produced a document this May entitled Regulatory Approaches for Priority Plastic Waste. It was a collaborative effort bringing together Quebec, BC, and Alberta. And our amazing Christina Seidel here, who is here today and who organized all this conference. She was part of the working committee. And I thank you, Christina, for inviting me here today. Matt Gammon from the FCM was part of the committee. 2 members of Recyc Quebec, Cascade, and Andrew Marr, who is my co-chair at Metro Vancouver. We focused on how best to control and manage such diverse and problematic articles such as shopping bags, beverage bottles, tires, or even clothes made from synthetic fibers. We then proposed for each product regulations which have to be most effective in reducing that waste. And these regulations include imposed recycled content, deposit systems, eco-fees, and extended producer responsibility, which is called EPR. All of us talked about it. So, in order to get to that solution, it is important to understand the nature of plastics. And as you certainly know, not all plastics are equal. They're not equally recyclable. Some, like PET, the #1 beverage containers, or that oil bottles, all the soft, thin, translucent plastic, and HDEP, the #2, which is milk jugs, containers for detergents, very, very, very much used in grocery stores. They have a very good value in the secondary market. But other plastics, like PVCs, and particularly #7, are not at all recyclable. The tendency in the industry today is unfortunately not to move towards the more recyclable material, but more and more to products that have various layers within the packaging within them. And some have even layers of different products in them, like Tetra Paks. And these products become more and more impossible to recycle. For instance, caps and labels of beverage containers should be made of the same resin, the label, the tap, and the bottle, so that you can recycle the whole thing, because separating them is too hard. And yeah, okay. Those are just simple things. We really have to look at this closely. And the ID code for plastic resin tells us that plastics are not all equal. Some people get confused. They think because there's like a kind of similar Mobius code on the plastic bottle that it means that it's either recycled or recyclable. But no, it is just a code. And some of it means it's not recyclable. Yet, these plastics, they cannot be mixed up. That's what the code means. Separate me, please, separately in individual packages. But yet, in our province of Quebec, we do not do that. We just put them all together. No one looks at the code. We just plunge everything in, soft plastic, hard plastic, wraps, whatever. Everything goes in, even glass. So we have broken glass into the container, all kinds of paper, and sometimes, of course, waste gets in and mixed up because we have big bins with lids on it. Anyways, so that creates a very contaminated end result, which is very hard to sort out at the end. Currently, plastic recycling generally means downcycling, taking plastic with a high purity and controlled qualities and making it into a plastic which is less pure with less demanding specifications. This is because plastics are contaminated during their useful life, but also during the recycling process. Single-stream curbside collection in particular makes it difficult to keep these types of plastics clean and separated. This is because mechanical recycling has a limited capacity to purify the recuperated plastic, and this downcycling makes it hard to reintroduce post-consumer plastics back into the value chain. So while chemical recycling is far better, for it can reduce post-consumer plastic back to its pure molecular state, it is still in the development phase. But more and more Quebec and Ontario companies, because we don't have the oil, but we get the oil and then we transform it. So we have startups like Loop Industries, which is not the same as the Loop we saw yesterday. Loop Industry in Quebec uses PET and brings it back to its molecular state. We also have Polystyver, and Polystyver takes styrofoam and brings it back to its molecular state. But unfortunately, they cannot bring it up to industrial level production. Not yet. So, a representative recently of the large soft drink company, not to mention Coke, they're very big in my neighborhood. They have a huge factory. They told me that they could be making bottles of recycled PET, but that the amount presently available on the market would only allow them to include 10% of the recycled content. Transcontinental, which is a large Quebec packaging company, which was recently faced, is still facing a potential ban on its 3.3 million weekly door-to-door distribution business, started producing a bag made from 100% recycled content. And Transcontinental just a few days ago told me that they are having a very hard time getting the needed number 4 plastic, because the recycling plant in our city puts together the number 3s and the number 7s all together, and the cost of sorting that out is very high. So Maja, a Quebec company, was the only one that for some years put on the market a water bottle made with 100% recycled content. And it recently ceased to do so because it was not competitive enough. By imposing recycled content in plastic packaging, governments can help create the needed, stable, viable market for the recycled resin. This will in turn foster innovation in the recycling business. If billions are given by the government to foster the oil and plastic industry, shouldn't they also be giving equal amounts of billions to foster chemical recycling? Just the few millions that are recently been promised are definitely not enough. So, I mentioned that plastic recuperation rates and recycling rates are low. One way to improve both rates is to adopt a deposit system. This is a system that has proven its efficiency over many decades. I know, Alberta, you are big. 5 minutes? Yeah, you're big in recycling, in deposits, returns. If the deposit price is high enough, it allows for about 90% recuperation rates. And this approach also helps reduce contamination. So the Greater Montreal region is lobbying the Quebec government presently because it wants to expand our existing deposit system. Because presently in Quebec, there's a deposit only on soft drink bottles, on soft drinks, but not on water, not on juice. So we want to change this. For instance, in Quebec, water bottles, which have no deposit system, are produced, there's about a billion plastic bottles produced every year in Quebec, and of those, 700 million end up in the environment, in landfills or the environment. So this is all very lost, recyclable PET material. We could ask ourselves, why should cities be responsible to manage all the discarded plastic objects? Extended Producer Responsibility, or EPR, says that the initial producer should be responsible to design, manage, and pay for the end of life of their product. This gives them a strong incentive to design objects that are easily recuperated and recycled. EPR is a system where the government sets the rules, responsibility, and goals, but the implementation is left to the private sector. British Columbia is a good example of this. We talked about it yesterday. 2 nonprofit organizations controlled by the producers, Recycle BC and NCorp, manage the entire recycling activity. Recycle BC manages the curbside recycling, and NCorp manages the deposit and return. BC presently has some of the highest recycling rates in Canada. Quebec, on the other hand, has only partial EPR. Yes, the companies pay for the system, but it is the cities that have to think about managing it. This limits the capacity to improve the system. So the Greater Montreal region, again, recently updating its waste management program, recommends that the Quebec government changes this EPR model. We want to have it more like BC. So because Canada has many large businesses that operate nationwide, it would be truly the best thing to harmonize EPR throughout the country. Because if you have EPR, you can implement eco-fees. And this is one of the measures that we present in our document. When EPR systems are in place, it becomes possible for the government to impose a disposal fee on bad packaging that is not recyclable or that contains no recycled content. It can also encourage good packaging. Around the world, studies have shown that dissuasive fees that have the best results to change undesired behavior. Charging a fee for a single plastic item is shown to be the most effective way to reduce waste. So all these different actions require federal government and all of us to work together. And the Council of Canadian Ministry of Environment also recently put out a plan for Canada. In this plan, this plan wants to influence plastic product design to promote recycled content and to create a national standard, with targets and timelines for increasing recycled content, with updated standards for measuring and reporting this recycled content. And just in line with this, there is also the industry that is getting organized. So the packaging industry, represented by a PAC, I'm sure all of you know PAC, that has 2,300 members, is creating also a program called PAC New, in which the industry wants to come up with a standard, which also will have recycled content. The 27th of September, Greta Sundberg came to Montreal. Inspired by her arrival, the youth movement against climate change organized the largest march in Canadian history. 500,000 people gathered in the streets of downtown Montreal. The subways were free that day, cars were kept out of the downtown core, and people swarmed the streets, and it felt incredible. Montrealers are proud of their mayor, Valérie Plante, who was invited that week to the UN's World Summit on Climate Change in New York. She was the only world mayor invited to speak. Montreal is presently working on an ambitious energy transition plan, and part of that plan are bans on some of single-use plastics. Yet, in order to achieve our common goal, we must work together to call for federal legislation to implement recycled content in plastics entering the Canadian market, and lobby our provincial governments to implement and harmonize EPR throughout the land to ensure a cohesive, agile, and efficient system. Together, we can be leaders in the creation of a new world economy because we Canadians are world experts in plastics. We know how to turn waste and pollution into a resource, save money, create jobs, and reduce the environmental impact of the plastic industry. Canadians expect us to rise to this challenge, and together we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Maja. Thanks, Maja. You did a great job. Appreciate it. Any questions for Maja? She spoke about a lot of different things. I know I had one. Given the breadth of your study, is there something that sort of rose to the surface in terms of the single greatest challenge that we are faced with? I mean, we've got lots in front of us, but what would you say would be the single greatest challenge that came out of your study?
Well, I think I addressed it. I think we all say we want to recycle, but I think the most difficult thing about recycling is the fact that we cannot get that recycled content back into the system. And that creates, it kind of blocks the system. But two things I would like to say, because we are talking about waters. In the study, we looked at tires, and we also looked at acrylic clothing, and they're both pollutants of our waters. Because tires, they degrade with the friction on the roads. And those little particles end up in our on our ditches and our streams and end up in the ocean. And actually 28% of the pollution in the ocean, of the plastic particles in the ocean, are of tires. So that was quite an amazing find. And also all our acrylic clothing, a lot of stuff we wear is acrylic. And acrylic, when you wash it, disintegrates and into little particles, and that through the wash ends up in our waters and also into our drinking water system. So those are two things that we can't, like for instance, for acrylic clothing, you would need, for instance, a filter on your machine, but for tires, we need innovation because there's no way we can catch all that disintegrated tires. But I think governments are afraid to impose fees because they're seen as a tax. But we have to be brave and we have to do the legislation that's needed, and it's not happening.
Thank you. So I think it's very clear to all of us that it's even difficult to answer the question of single greatest challenge because there are so many. So thank you, Maja, again. So we're actually doing well for time. So hardly last but least, I'd like to introduce you to Lindsay Christianson. Like you and many of our speakers today, Lindsay cares deeply for oceans, for people, for animals, and the planet. Lindsay's mission is to collaborate with talented hearts and minds on high-impact projects that stop ocean plastic and improve human lives. He is an ambitious person who values building relationships, helping others in their goals, and being a creative ideas guy. As Director of Business and Partner Development at the Plastic Bank, co-creator of their Social Plastic Collection Credit, and an active member of the 3RI Project Standard Development Committee, Lindsay has become a contributing subject matter expert in the field of plastic neutrality, helping organizations assess and rebalance their plastic footprint. Lindsay builds partnerships that aim to enable authentic corporate citizenship through purposeful work outcomes. Please welcome me in joining Lindsay to the stage.
Thank you, Cherie, for that warm introduction, and for Christina and the RCA for having me at this event to share the stage with Joel and Maja to speak on this topic. It was great to see everybody out last night in their costumes. I saw some seaweed, I saw scuba divers, I saw mermaids. Where's our shipping container? Is she in here? Oh, there we go. I was thinking it might be caught in customs, but you made it, so that's good. Terrible joke to start, but why not? I hail from Vancouver on the West Coast, and I always love to come to Jasper. This is an amazing place that is amazingly pristine, and very, very grateful to be able to spend time here. So as Cherie mentioned, we're working towards stopping ocean plastic, and we're doing that by creating a life Ascension platform. And I'll get into how we do that. But I thought a good place to start is really with our core values. One of the places is really thinking about how do we gather together? How do we gather together as people? How do we gather the plastic that needs to be prevented from getting into the ocean and provide a meaningful home for that? How do we reveal the value, not only in the waste plastic itself, but in people? Yourselves in the room again, and the people that are doing the collecting in the regions of the world that we operate. We could almost put this as number one, but to act in the service of love. We've got a lot of issues in the world, and it's very easy to point the finger. We get nowhere doing that quite quickly, but when we have an open heart, we can put our judgment aside and really find solutions that we can explore and move forward. And lastly is really to become the person that can make change. For us, it's not about being the people that could stop ocean plastic when we started. It was really to become those people that could stop ocean plastic. And like yourselves, as we're working to solve these issues in recycling, many of you might not have the solutions today, but you can become those people. So I would implore you to do that. As far as the numbers, you've probably heard them, 8.6 million tons of plastic entering the ocean every year. You've got one dump truck of plastic entering the ocean every minute, which is a daunting number. And 80% of this plastic is coming from a lot of the places in the world that aren't set up with any collection or recycling infrastructure that can manage this plastic waste. So we're at a conference. We're away from our homes. Let's pretend nobody's there. You come home and your sink is overflowing. You've got a mop, a bucket, and a plunger in front of you. What are you going to do first? That's right. You're going to turn off the tap. Why would it make any sense to get on your hands and knees and start mopping it up as water is continually flowing over when you want to turn off the tap and eliminate that problem? And that's what we endeavor to do. We're endeavoring to turn off the tap. We're a root cause solution that's working to stop ocean plastic while improving human lives. And as a social enterprise, I'll get into how we do that. The mission, as we said, is to really gather 1 billion people together to be able to do this, to be able to improve human lives, to give people an opportunity to pick up the plastic that's underneath their feet, give them a place to be able to return it, and be able to exchange that for cash, goods, and services. And when we can turn that plastic into a resource which is treated like money, we start to see action happening. We start to see people take action. We start to see nations taking action. And that's really what we endeavor to do. We go into areas of the world that are extremely affected by plastic pollution, like Haiti, as we see on the screen here, going through not only plastic issues, but civil unrest, people needing incomes, places where people are making less than $2 a day. With our program, we provide premium rewards for them to be able to return these plastics back to our collection branches and earn upwards of $4 and $5 and $6 a day, actually giving them a chance to transcend poverty. Or places like Baziuk. This is a slum in the Philippines, just outside of Manila. Or in Indonesia, where you can see one of the major rivers choked off by plastic pollution. Or in Rio, where we've also got a program that's being deployed now by the support of one of our partners. So you can see that we've got these problems in our own country, and where does it end up? It's not just in shipping barges or anything like that, but it's really the ocean-bound waterways. It's the rivers, it's the streams. When we look at a place like Haiti, or these places that I'm showing you on screen, the waste management there is also not that effective in many ways. And you get storm sewers that are clogged up, not just with plastic, but just with debris and waste. So every time that it rains, it picks up the plastic, and it starts to create a bit of a flood right through the city. And in Haiti, this comes up right to your car window, and traffic stops to a halt. Plastic moves through the city and the town. The water subsides, goes into the ocean, and people move on with their lives. It's these types of problems that we're really working to address, to put root cause solutions into play. So how do we do this? As I mentioned, we go into the areas of the world that are really affected. We work with the locals that are looking for these opportunities and set them up for success. We educate them on different types of plastic that we will reward. Right now, these are the main types of plastic as culprits that are in high demand, as well as high volume, being PET plastics, HDPE, polypro, and low-density polyethylene. Collectors get registered on our system and become a collector member as they're over the age of 18, and we do this as a verification on our platform. Then that material is sorted first, and then weighed by color, or weighed by type, I should say, of plastic, and then they get a cash reward in return. They can also go a step further and be able to save this value of their plastic in a digital token. And with that token, they can exchange that for goods and services. They can pay tuition for their children. They can also get high-efficiency cooking stoves, medical insurance for our collectors, things that are going to make a difference in people's lives when you don't even have identification. So we put worth behind the things that they're doing. Then this collected plastic is transported to our processing partners in these countries of collection, where it's then washed, flaked, and pelletized, and we provide what's called social plastic to brand partners, where they make new products and new packages to be able to put into the world to meet their goals. We hear a lot of companies that have 2025, 2030 goals, working to put 100% recycled plastic into their products. So when they see our recycled plastic that comes with this dual narrative of being able to have environmental impact as well as social impact, we start to have a lot of interesting conversations and build stories that can support their broader narrative. But we can't do it alone. It's really done with our partners, who are a lot of the major heroes in this, along with our collector members. One of the ways they can do this is activating collection ecosystems. And for us, the collection ecosystem is a series of collection branches where companies or collector members can bring the returned plastic back to these branches in return for the goods and services. These get branded by our partners so that they can show the world that they are active in these regions. We are currently active in Haiti and the Philippines, Indonesia and Brazil. We've also got expansion moving into Egypt, as well as Belize, and areas throughout Southeast Asia. This material, as I mentioned, is then collected. We provide the material as social plastic for companies to use in their packaging. And then on those packages is going to be a mark that says social plastic. And the endeavor is that when a customer is picking up a product that says this is making an impact, this is helping to improve human lives and our oceans, versus one that's not, we're starting to see small premiums in a suggested retail price versus one that doesn't move off the shelf more quickly. Another way to get involved is through launching an impact program. One way is through an impact guarantee. Some companies do this and they don't even use plastic in their business. But with every product that they sell, they provide a percentage to the plastic bank to be able to provide more collector rewards. As we mentioned at the beginning, I'm also one of the co-creators of a social plastic collection credit. This works very similar to a carbon credit, where you've got a emission from your company, but in this case, we've got a plastic footprint. So we are able to take a company's plastic footprint measured by weight and by volume, and then provide them with a collection credit. Each collection credit will then neutralize 1 kilogram of plastic that you use, and we will use that funding to pay for a collector award to neutralize 1 kilogram. So 1 for 1 of what you're using. We've also got a workforce engagement program where your workforce can be plastic neutral. And this is the opportunity for companies to neutralize their staff's plastic footprint for the amount of plastic that they use in their daily lives. We've got this number at about 84 kilograms per person, and a company can step up and neutralize the plastic footprint of their workforce. One thing that we don't have up on this screen that we see is our interfaith program. And we were very fortunate to be invited to the Catholic Church to speak on the topic of ocean plastics. 100,000 people coming to the Vatican every Sunday for Mass. And with this program, we're able to work with the cardinals who head up poverty and environment so that there's collection systems in play to handle this plastic coming in, 100,000 people every week. That material then gets sold. We then use that funding to be able to provide more collector rewards. Some of the material as well is being provided for the Catholic Church to provide a rosary made out of social plastic. So we're really about trying to think outside the box and provide novel solutions. Behind all of this is, thank you. Behind this is the power of IBM and partnerships, as I mentioned. And one really critical partnership is with IBM. And the platform that I mentioned is a blockchain technology that provides an audit trail and traceability of supply chain. So we can show an impact dashboard of material that's been collected, the number of collectors that have been impacted, and communities that have been able to participate. And in this way, with the traceability side, we can leave an audit trail, so Deloitte or whomever your auditor comes in and can give the rubber stamp with confidence. So this is something that I'll share with you now, which is a short video that was produced by IBM that gives you a bit more of a context of what we do as Plastic Bank in a bit of a visual metaphor. So guys, if you could play this video, that would be great.
What if we could turn trash into money? The Plastic Bank is doing just that by exchanging plastic for digital credits, redeemable for everything from food to education, powered by IBM blockchain. When you understand the potential of new technology, you can put smart to work.
So that's one of the ways that we're building partnerships is, one of the folks at IBM, a marketer, sitting at home at the end of the day with his family, having dinner, talking about what he does for work. Usually it's talking about data and black boxes and things that are going to provide security and so forth. But when he was able to see that they could use blockchain to be able to provide security and traceability that could stop ocean plastic, that dinner table conversation at the end of the day really changed. His kids no longer thought that he was just a data head. They were proud to go and talk to their friends and say, my dad is helping stop ocean plastic, helping improve lives. So I would encourage everybody to kind of think outside of the realm of what you currently do and where there's different ways to innovate. So our impact, again, when we look at our collector members, how are we doing this? How are we providing an Ascension platform? It's really about dignifying recycling in these countries. In countries like Haiti, recycling is sometimes looked and frowned upon. Many of the world call collectors waste pickers, scavengers, and find that very derogatory. So we make that narrative a little bit different. We call them collector members. We give them identification card. We empower them that this is an entrepreneurial opportunity. And with it, they can actually provide very solid income for themselves and for their family. We provide a lot of hope for collectors that no longer have an opportunity to really find ways to earn more than $2 a day. We unlock the access and provide a life beyond recycling. This is one of our collectors in Haiti, Lisa Nassis. She was widowed in the earthquake, 2011, and has 7 children. She's making less than $2 a day before working with the Plastic Bank. And with our program, she's become one of our star collectors. She's been able to put 3 of her kids into school and be able to provide an opportunity to see a life beyond poverty and recycling. This is a program in Haiti that has been funded by Henkel One of the programs that is in play there is that recycling can be brought back to pay for tuition credits, as I mentioned. And to go a step further, in Henkel's program, they've got a program called A Million Chances, which is for women, and it provides an opportunity for women who are down in their luck to be able to have a vocational training. The brand on the bottom left is Schwarzkopf, which is a German beauty brand, and with that, we were able to put a program where people could recycle their way, first out of poverty, then get vocational training to become a hairstylist. This is an ecosystem in Haiti itself. You can see kids standing around a solar-powered collection center. This is one of the only sources of light in Haiti, in the Port-au-Prince area. So it becomes a point of security and safety, and often you see kids doing their homework under this light. This is what an ecosystem looks like in the Philippines. Much different. One that's been funded by Aldi, the retailer. And with that, we've been able to use the collection carts, and this is a hub and spoke model where we have a central hub where aggregate collection comes from supporting spoke areas for collection. This is an ecosystem in Bali, where you see that they've gotten creative with scooters and repurposing rice sacks. And these are our collector members and some of our staff in the Indonesia and Bali region. And then, as I mentioned, behind all of this is the blockchain. We utilize this technology to provide real-time data, provide the audit-proof supply chain, impact reports, and become the gold standard. And when we're working with 3RI Initiative on the plastic neutrality piece, we're looking to tie this data in so that they can work together and people can see an impact dashboard. This is a quick glimpse of what things look like, so you can see the amount of plastic that's been collected. This is specifically through Aldi's program, showing the impact there. In this case, this is about 1,000 tons of material. Plastic Bank as a whole has been able to collect over 5 million kilograms of plastic to date, which is a number that we're very proud of. And as far as our heroes, we're really working with these companies as partners to help them get on a journey for sustainability, to be able to provide a path of purpose and leave a legacy behind. And some of these partners are here on the screen. On the left and the right, we've got products from Henkel themselves. Ocean Bottle is a group that is doing an impact guarantee, and they provide $5 give back to Plastic Bank for every bottle that they sell. DM is the German retail grocer who is also doing plastic neutrality with us. In the bottom left, Logitech with their gaming mouse. Earth Group, I'm not sure if Matt is in the room, if your hand's up, where are you at? He's one of our partners with plastic neutrality. HelloFresh coming on board to neutralize every box that they sell that's delivered to your door with their brand called Green Chef. And then No Planet B in the bottom left. And then we've got Henkel on the left with another product made of social plastic. Marks and Spencer making their bag, their reusable bag with Polypro. And then Windex, one of their SC Johnson's iconic brands. So I leave you with the ability to potentially gather together, become part of the 1 billion people, join our revolution, gain the benefit of the social impact network that we're building. There's many ways to have local action and global impact and take meaningful action. And with that, I say thank you.
Thank you, Lindsay. I thought that was awesome. I'm guessing that many of you did too. I think that really kind of forces the issue around thinking outside the box and shifting the paradigm of what is possible. And I love what you guys are doing. And I'm guessing that there might be some questions. Awesome. Okay.
In the we've talked a lot about the broad context of recycling, and there's been a lot of conversation that's gone beyond the borders of Alberta. But in Maja's conversation, when she talked about the $2.1 billion that went back into the oil industry here in Alberta, that was about jobs. It was about people that are here. And that's the conversations that we have to, in this room, go back and have with our spouses, our kids, our coworkers, our colleagues, parents of our kids at school. And I'm just wondering about the advice that we can give for the riggers and the frontline workers about why bringing recycled content back in is a place where they can buy in for the next 5 to 10 years instead of being angry about not doing what they know how to do in pulling virgin material out of the ground to be used in materials that are great that everybody's trying to buy around the world. I don't know who's the best person to answer it.
It's a great question, and I was actually going to ask you, do you have somebody specific who you'd like to address that to?
Well, I thought Joel might be a good one to talk to. I thought Maja might be a good one to
Awesome.
talk to.
Okay.
Ruben might be.
So let's start with Maja, and then I'm guessing we have
I'd like
Joel
to-
on the line. Cool.
Yeah, I'd like to answer that because I didn't say not to give the incentives to the old. I didn't say that. But I said if we are doing it, we must at least finance the other part because we'll never get there. We'll never get there. That's all. But I understand. Yeah.
Joel?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how it relates directly. I mean, when it comes to, we have been engaging with, gear manufacturers and things like that about, ways to maybe design gear differently and things like that. But I mean, there's also talk of, for example, extended producer responsibility schemes for fishing gear specifically. There's something being developed in the European context. But I think it's still early days. I agree with what you're saying, but yeah, I don't really have much in the way to offer in direct response to that, I'm afraid.
So
Little
maybe,
outside my scope.
sorry. Thanks, Joel. So maybe I'll just quickly jump in and say this. I guess we ultimately know that there is a problem, and the problem has significant magnitude to it. I think ultimately what we need to be doing is so complex, and there are so many layers to unpeel with all of this, that we do need to go in with a glass half full perspective. And I mean, that is difficult, but if we go in with the glass half empty, I think ultimately this is a challenge that becomes insurmountable, right? So if it's glass half full, and as a result of this conference in particular, we've seen some really dynamic examples of solutions that are being undertaken, not limited to studies that are giving us broader knowledge, are allowing us to hone in on where do we need to be laser focused, and maybe where can we afford some slack. And then in particular, with respect to what say Lindsay's doing, what Chloe's doing, they're on the ground, and similarly Joel, they're on the ground and they're actually taking action. And so it's a bit of a balancing act between becoming more knowledgeable, becoming more aware, getting a better understanding of where do we need to focus our attention, because there's so much that needs to be done, and then a healthy balance of actual doing. And I think then the narrative shifts a little bit so that it's not all terribly bleak, but that there are some positive, hopeful stories coming out of this where we can report successes, and hopefully that can be the kind of messaging that we specifically take back to kids, to our children, that allows the Gretas of the world to actually have a louder voice and to champion and rally other people behind them. So I'm not sure I totally answered your question. But it is definitely a tough one, and I think ultimately it's what we're all facing, right? So thank you for asking that. Any other questions? Okay.
I just had a question. And bonjour, merci pour arriver ici de Montréal. When you were talking about, and I just took a little note, you were talking about increasing the deposit charge rate in Quebec for, say, shampoo bottles and stuff like that. I just looked at Stats Canada's import value, and it's $50.6 billion for August. I'm just wondering if maybe we charge, and knowing how consumer goods and some of the products we import, what they're made out of, knowing that a lot of those materials actually do have plastics in them, whether it's through upholstery, whether it's polyester, nylons, polyurethanes, polyamides, olefins, all that stuff. Would it maybe make more financial sense to impose a tariff to that $50.6 billion coming in and put that money towards improved domestic recycling processes locally, and then also charge a tariff, not just for goods coming in, then on top of the consumer, take that 5 cents per imported good, 5 cents per sold retail good, and throw that back into greater capacity to reprocess all of our plastics, as opposed to just tariffs on some,
I think
or
that
deposit rate on some?
you talk about two different things, and I think the deposit system is very different from the other part. Because, for instance, in Montreal, in 1980s, they put about a 5 cent deposit on soft drinks. And I think a 2-liter bottle is 10 cents. The same price for 40 years. If you increase it to 20 cents or 40 cents, and in Germany it's $1, everybody brings it back. And nobody loses, because you get your money back and the consumer gets the money back. It's just a deposit. It's not money that you actually pay. It's just a system. It just accounts for you to bring it back. And the other thing is a much more complex issue, which I cannot answer. And I know the beverage industry came and they lobbied us a lot, because we did a lot of commissions. We listened to people before we changed our system. And I know the beverage industry is incredibly against it. They don't want to be responsible. They don't want to bring it back. And they say, we'll just charge a cent more and we'll put it back into your recycling thing. No, it doesn't work. We know that the deposit system works because it creates purity of the product. People will return it. And second, it will be pure. It'll all be the same. For instance, PET, it'll all be the same, and it can be reused easily. It doesn't have to be sorted after. So that's a very different and important thing to understand, and to resist, for all of us to resist to the lobby industry that doesn't want us to go into that. They just want it all mixed up together.
But then all the other, for example, you think of the dollar store trinkets. Instead of putting a tariff or a deposit return fee on all of those things, because I appreciate the bottles, the reusable bottles and stuff like that, and asking for a $1 deposit fee. But if you look at the millions of plastic water guns, of little crappy pens that work for 2 weeks, if you look at all the products that the teachers buy for their students, for the 20 kids in their class, that get used, that have a lifespan for 2 weeks, instead of imposing a deposit fee on those things, because those things are just as, put a charge for all of it, and then people don't have to return it to their shop. They can put all of that plastic waste into the recycling, and the money that you guys make from the fee for the billions coming in monthly can go back to, instead of people being forced to bring their bottles, their shampoo bottles back into the grocery store. I don't know.
The way, can I answer? Well, the way it works, we're just doing it for beverage bottles. It's not for the other things.
But why not for all of it?
Well, but for the other things, it can be EPR, where there's a charge. So let's say that whatever your pen or the glass or whatever you're buying at the dollar store is not recyclable. If it doesn't have recycled content in it, and if it's not recyclable, well, there will be a surcharge. But if it is, there is no surcharge. It's a system that would be based something like that. So it's not a deposit, it's a charge. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Maja. So I think if I keep talking, I'm the only thing standing between more coffee or tea. And so I will stop, and I will say a huge thank you. So I hope you can join me in thanking Joel, Maja, and Lindsay. And also, I'd be remiss if I didn't thank the City of Edmonton, who made this session possible, and of course to all the folks who have spent lots of time and energy in coordinating and planning this conference as it nears to a close. I thank you for being here, and I welcome you to have some more coffee or tea. Thank you.